Welcome to the Heart for God podcast. With many years of experience pastoring and helping to start churches, Dr. Jim Townsley has some practical and biblical advice that can be a great help to you and your ministry. On this podcast, Dr. Townsley and other guests with special expertise cover a variety of topics. His goal is to help you lead your church to be a healthy, strong, and balanced ministry, and for your family to be happy, healthy, and living for the Lord.
Thanks for joining me today, and I'm going to continue a series on preachers that I have known. First one, of course, on Dr. Lee Roberson. It was through his ministry that I was saved at a Bible conference. He baptized me that night. Of course, that's where I received my training for the ministry. It was a very practical place to be, and just the vision and faith of Dr. Roberson, his passion for souls and soul winning and church building, it certainly had a tremendous impact and was life-changing for me, of course. But I want to talk about someone you would not be familiar with. Very few people would be, probably. He was a country preacher. His name was Olin Strader. Olin Strader. So I was out of church, and when we were very young, I attended church, but my parents stopped going, for which I was grateful. I didn't want to go. So all through my junior high and high school years, the teen years, I lived just like everybody else, just in the world, doing what the world did. But it got to the point my mother was really concerned about the way I was living, and she just was fasting and praying. She didn't purposely fast. She just couldn't eat. She was overwhelmed. We weren't even going to church, and my mother would be sitting in a rocking chair. I would come in on Friday night, and she would be reading her Bible and praying and weeping. And that went on for a while. We had a rough couple of years, but it drove her back to God and drove her to church. And at this church, something was going on. It was the late 60s. So this pastor, Olin Strader, had come to Olive Branch Baptist Church in Linton, Indiana. The church had a history of going through pastors and a lot of ups and downs, I guess you'd say, in the church. But he was a young man, I guess. At that point, he was in his early 30s. And his wife, Twyla, and at that time, I think they had 2 children. But he had such a passion for seeing people saved, and he had a unique way to make you feel important and take an interest in you. He was a real people person, and as was Twyla. But he also had a passion for revival and seeing God work and training young people, challenging young people to go into ministry. So it had a real impact on my mother in particular. My father started going, and I went a few times, but I ended up going to Purdue University, so I wasn't there. But God was working through that, and that church was experiencing a great movement where it's a very rural country area, and it's a mining area. There's a lot of soft coal mining. And some of those guys, they didn't even have a high school degree. Their English grammar was horrible. They were tough men. They curse and swear. I mean, some of these guys were pretty rough people. And he was seeing some of those men get saved. I saw them stand up and testify, weeping, just praising God for what he had done in their life and had changed their life. And it wasn't just 1 or 2. There were just many things happening like that. And the church was really growing and souls being saved, lives being changed. We hear about the failures of preachers. You hear about, this man, he did something wrong. And And everybody's vulnerable. We all could fall, and and Satan can get a hold of somebody. But the vast majority of people I've known are just good, dedicated, godly people. And Brother Olin and Twyla invested their lives in young people. And I can tell you, one Sunday morning, they had all the young people stand in the front of the church that surrendered their life to God. In this little country church, there was 18 people, young people, teenagers, stood up and gave testimony of what God was doing in their life. And myself, my wife, and a few others entered the ministry and stayed in the ministry a long time, spent their whole life in the ministry. And he had a passion for country people and farmers, and he loved tractors. And he had a different take than some people have. He felt like there's a lot of people in the country that they grow up with certain values, that to work hard and be respectful, careful with your money, the more conservative background. And he just felt like there's a mission field to reach young people and see them go into the ministry. And I can't tell you how many people he influenced to go into the ministry. One of the first young people that surrendered ended up going to Alaska, was on the mission field, pastored the church, and just recently resigned after more than 40 years. But I could just name many, many others, that how he influenced them, as well as other people, adults in the church. But he liked the FFA, the Future Farmers of America. He liked the 4-H program. There are different rural things that he was very familiar with, and he just had a way about having a burden for young people and challenging them to serve the Lord. And I'll tell you, he wasn't the best preacher, or as far as oratory is concerned. He had a lot of shortcomings. A lot of times he was not timely when he did certain things. But the thing that has stuck with me is many, many mornings he would get up early and he would crawl on his hands and knees through all the pews and to the pulpit and to the mourner's bench, and spent time in prayer. And he asked me if I would join him and come. It was like 6 a.m, and I said, yeah, I will come. And boy, after hearing him pray, he said, now, Jim, you pray. And I thought, how am I going to pray after that? It just seemed like he could get a hold of God, and was praying for revival, begging God to do something. And wow, God did a lot of things. There are, I think, so many men that have dedicated their life, to some extent ministered in obscurity. They're not nationally known, but there are many, many men that have just been faithful and just had a burden to influence others, and seeing people go into the ministry. Sadly, there's a lot of churches never have an ordination. They don't have anybody go in the ministry. And yet in his lifetime, he influenced many, myself included. He took me down to Bible college. He was the one that recommended I go to Tennessee Temple. And, of course, I didn't know anything about a Bible college, but it was through his influence that I ended up going there. And his wife, Twyla, is actually the one that spoke to me. And my motives were not right. I went there to play basketball, but while I was there, God worked in my heart, and that's where I got saved, and my life was changed. And he pastored many churches through the Midwest, many in Indiana, and I think Twyla was from Illinois towards St. Louis. He was from Kansas originally, and he did go to several churches. He didn't stay in one place, but he certainly made his mark. And I just looked at a picture of him. I read his obituary again, and it just brings such fond memories and gratefulness. Just seeing that picture of him, to think of the influence he had on my life, and not just me, but so many other young people. And so there's a lot of good men out there doing a great job serving the Lord. And I'm just sharing with you some of the men that I have known and the privilege to know and how God used them and how they influenced my life. Well, I hope that was a blessing to you. And, you may have preachers that that may be somewhat obscure as far as the world's concerned. But, when they have an impact in your life, that means everything. And so I'm so grateful for he and his wife. They were such a blessing to my wife and I, and he had a burden to encourage me and gave me material. So we have a lot to be thankful for, of all the preachers who've gone before us, who paved the way, who sacrificed to help us along the way.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, consider sharing it with a friend. You can also follow at Dr. Townsley on Twitter or on Facebook at Jim Townsley.